Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Safer streets, more police on the beat, stamping out antisocial behaviour in every community, because nobody should feel insecure in the streets that they call home.
Well, that was Keir Starmer outlining his new plan for policing. As a former Director of Public Prosecutions, he knows a thing or two about fighting crime. But is this crackdown what the country needs? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Yuan. Welcome to the programme. Now, Lizzy, I was struck watching PMQs yesterday, how the PM kept turning the subject back to immigration. He was determined to park Labour's tanks on Tory territory. And that continues today with a major announcement on policing. We're told that Keir Starmer will pledge that every neighbourhood in England and Wales will get a named police officer in charge of local crime problems. And we're promised the government will eventually add 13,000 more officers in an effort to tackle crime.
But don't call it a relaunch.
Definitely not a relaunch.
Bobbies on the beat. I suppose the focus on crime is perhaps an indication that Keir Starmer is alive to the electoral threat, not just from the Conservatives, but also from Nigel Farage. And look, it's an issue that's got an increasing salience. Tom Carver of The Times just posted on X that it's crept up to be the fourth most important issue for voters, just ahead of immigration. That's according to one Office for National Statistics survey at least. But let's discuss now with someone who has first-hand experience of community policing. Festus Akinbusoye was the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire until earlier this year, and he's also been a volunteer special constable. So, Festus, wonderful to have you with us on the programme. What's your take on Keir Starmer's plans for more local named officers?
Well, first of all, I think it's a positive thing to want to see an increase in police officer numbers. The reality is that you cannot police on the cheap, and you need police officers to police. However, the government needs to stop misleading the public about what they are doing. And I say that because their headline figure of 13,000 officers actually, in reality, is 3,000 new police officers. The breakdown of that 13,000, from what I can recall, is 3,000 new PCs, 3,000 officers or 4,000 are going to be redeployed from other areas currently within police forces, 3,000 special constables. Like you said, I used to be a special constable myself, and I think about 3,000 PCSOs who are not police officers. So in total, you're not getting 13,000 new officers. You're just getting 3,000 officers. And it's important that we get that very clear, that the government is very clear in what it is saying as well to the people of this country.
So you take issue with the numbers. I want to ask you about PCSOs, actually. As you say, some of these officers will be PCSOs without the power of arrest. Do you think that taxpayers get good value for money from PCSOs?
In fact, my very first arrest as a special constable was with the help of a PCSO, because PCSOs, their only job is neighborhood policing, but they are not police officers with the powers of arrest. But the level of local intelligence that they have is very, very good, because they don't tend to move around as much as a PC would do, who has to work across different functions within policing. So in my opinion, and when I was Police and Crime Commissioner, for example, we did not reduce the number of PCSOs because we saw a value in what they provided.
Would it not be better to spend the money on police officers, though? Because they're not much cheaper, are they, than fully fledged police officers?
Initially, they are not. In fact, in some cases, they're more expensive in the early stages, but over a period of time, a PC actually, then costs more. But I think there's room for all of those roles within policing. But the thing is that when you have a PC, okay, people have to realize this: a police officer, as part of their progression in policing, by necessity, they will move around different functions. Okay, so they could be in neighborhood policing for 2 or 3 years, then they move into maybe firearms if they qualify, then they go into cyber policing, then they go into specialist, other specialist areas. So they will not be able to stay in your neighborhood for as long as many people would like. For PCSO, they don't have a choice. They have to remain in the community, so they have that benefit. So the reality is that the way that policing currently works is that you can't have a PC stay in an area for as long as people would like, hence why PCSOs help to kind of fill that gap.
So you get that benefit of the local connection. You mentioned the funding issue. Of course, we know that the Labour government is incredibly fiscally constrained. But going back in history, I wonder how much damage the Conservative government did in the austerity years when, of course, police numbers fell by 20,000 in less than a decade.
Well, of course, there's no ironing over the fact that there was a financial crisis of which many other countries brought in austerity measures of different varieties. The coalition government that came in 2010 decided to employ a period of austerity, which, in my opinion, the current Labour government on the current trajectory will likely have to do as well, even though they're saying that they're not going to do so. But what I will say as well is this, because I saw this firsthand as a police commissioner, I saw a reversal of those austerity measures between 2019 and 2024 when Boris came into government. In fact, actually started with Theresa May around 2016-17, where more funding started to come back into policing after the previous 5 or 6 years of the police numbers and budgets being cut. So in my opinion, I would rather that the government did a U-turn on the austerity years, which it did, and that brought in 20,000 extra police officers to replace the ones that was lost. But the experience, unfortunately, could never be got back that quickly. So in my area, for example, I did not just meet my target for recruiting police officers, I exceeded my target each of those 3 years and became one of the very few police forces in the country that actually bucked the trend of retaining more police officers. And that's a much bigger issue that very few people are talking about in policing at the moment. The attrition rate is so high. And that's why I think the 3,000 officer numbers that the government are talking about is literally going to just be a drop in the ocean for policing demand that we have in this country right now.
So an issue about retention. I want to ask you if you think that police and crime commissioners have been a success. It seemed like a bold reform when David Cameron introduced them, but it's fair to say they haven't really caught the public imagination, have they? The turnout in your last election was less than 20%, fewer than 1 in 5 people in your area bothered voting in that election. Do they make a difference to policing?
Of course, I would say so. I can say that I did, and I can very much tell you what I did. I would probably think that I was one of the more higher profile police and crime commissioners during my time until the electorate had a different idea. Well, like many other Conservatives were kicked out of office in May this year. And now we see what we get for that under the current government and some of their failed promises in just 5 months. But look, police and crime commissioners do a heck of a lot that many would not realize when it comes to commissioning of services to support victims of crime, when it comes to lobbying for funding around their local forces in terms of budget, when it comes to chairing criminal justice boards that brings together the courts, the prisons, policing, local authorities, and make sure that those different units are working together. Police and crime commissioners are not operational leads. It is not their job to run the day-to-day operations of a police force. That is the job of a chief constable. Admittedly, though, what I will say, and I gave evidence about this during the Home Affairs Select Committee a couple of years ago, that the first cohort of police and crime commissioners was very questionable. I mean, if you go into history, there were some that were up to all kinds of very, very weird stuff. Then there's a second iteration of police and crime commissioners that was better. I was part of the third cycle of police and crime commissioners, and I think that was better. And there's a fourth one that it remains to be seen how good they are. So I think gradually it is getting better. It's a new role. And for me, I was very fortunate because I actually had previous experience within policing. And that really helped me a lot in terms of confidence with frontline police officers and with the chief constables that I work with as well. So for me anyway, I would have thought I give value for money for our residents. But I think the jury's still out overall as to how some of them are making their presence felt.
I mean, would you say that there are issues still with trust between communities and officers? Also, in terms of the relationship between women and police, how big of an issue are those two things, do you think?
Of course, there are concerns, and there will be when we continue to hear about failings. I mean, almost every other week, you will hear some kind of a misconduct hearing taking place of a police officer being investigated for sexual offences, or we see a very low rate of conviction for rapes and sexual offences, which the reporting of it has actually increased. And I think that's a positive sign that people feel more confident to come forward and report these offences. But the success rate in terms of resolving this is quite low. And that is something that requires a heck of a lot more work and more drilling down as to the reasons why. Obviously, we have the issue within the criminal justice system where it takes a long time for cases to get to court. And now you're seeing the issue of victim attrition. So the amount of rates, the rate at which victims are dropping out and no longer supporting an investigation. Though all of those things ebb and chip away at public confidence in policing. But overall, what I will say is this, from my own experience on the front line and then at a much more senior role within policing as a police and crime commissioner, I can tell you now, the majority of police officers do an absolutely fantastic job, whether it's dealing with rape or dealing with child sexual abuse or knife crime. But the level of demand that police officers in this country deal with compared to the level of available resources is something that many people really do not appreciate. It is extraordinary.
Festus, I want to ask you about everyday crimes. Do you think the police put enough effort into tackling things like burglary and phone thefts and shoplifting? Did you see progress in your area as PCC? Actually,
in my area, we saw one of the biggest falls in domestic burglaries, and I was one of the first police force in the country, actually, before it became a national thing. In fact, I got a shout out for this, at the dispatch box in the House of Commons. We were one of the first forces to ensure that every domestic burglary, so residential burglary, had a police staff attend to collect forensics. And who would have thought that if the police turn up to burglary, the success rate increases because you get forensics in time.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, it's the same people who commit a lot of these burglaries.
But Festus, where you're talking about these successes, I wonder how you actually replicate that across the country. Are forces actually sharing info as well as they could?
There's more of that needs to happen. And I think it's becoming better at the moment. It's nowhere near as good enough. I mean, I can tell you now that the level of information sharing between different government departments, including policing, is dreadful. It's dreadful. Everybody works in their silo. So I think part of the reform, which I welcome, that the current government are working on is to improve the level of information sharing by actually centralizing some functions within policing. But we were able to have some success. But there were some areas that were not as successful. But the reality is this. Everything cannot be a priority. You only have so many police officers. So, for example, the Met, they are projected to be about 1,200 police officers short in this current financial year, and they're looking to find about £400 million worth of efficiency savings. At the same time, you've seen a growth in organized criminal gangs. You've seen a lot of issue around firearms. You've seen a lot of knife crime. You've seen sexual offences. And at the same time, at the other extreme, you've got shoplifting, bike theft, mobile phone snatching. Where do you place your priorities? And it is not quite as easy as saying, just go to every report of a bike that has been stolen and get a police officer there to go and nab the offenders. It's not that simple. But yes, I agree with you. A heck of a lot more needs to be done with that. But different police forces sadly prioritize things differently.
Festus, really good to get your thoughts on that. Thanks so much for joining us. Festus Akinbusoye, the Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Bedfordshire up until earlier this year.
Well, that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer is Sean Gostamakia. I'm Yuan Potts.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. We'll be back on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.